Okay, I guess we are live on Teams. So I'm Kristen Woodward, professor of art in the Department of Art and Art History, and we are here with artist Kathy Halper today. I am so excited to have her, I would say in person, but almost in person. Um, Thank you for taking the time to spend it with us today and tell us a little bit more about your work, which is installed in the project space in our Friedman Gallery. And the students, some of them have already seen it. I've taken some classes down. My gender in the visual arts class is meeting there on Wednesday. So I'm sure they'll have even more to say after they hear what inspired you. So let me just give a little bit of biographical information about our artist. Born in Chicago, she combines her interest in narrative art, high and low materials, and humor to create both traditional oil paintings on canvas, as well as 3D mixed media paintings and sculptures documenting her life, routines, comfort, and anxiety. I love that. She warps perspectives and builds out objects using cardboard, clay, and other tools to tell stories in her unique voice. Halper has been a full-time self-taught artist for 30 years. Her work has been shown at George Billis, LA, Muriel Gupin Gallery in New York, Jonathan Ferreira Gallery in New Orleans, and Packer Shuff Gallery in Chicago, among others. She was selected by Lucy Lepard from the Center Now and Kendall College of Art and Design as part of Art Prize and has participated in Terrain Biennial. She has been shown at Context Miami Art Week, SOFA Chicago, and has been featured in HuffPost, Art Voices, and Surface Design Journal. She lives and works now in Evanston, Illinois. Thank you so much. This is exciting. My students have been reading Lucy Lepard as part of their gender in the visual
Oh,
arts course. So
oh, cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
they'll be interested to know, what brought you to this point. We know this work isn't your most recent work, but it certainly seems very topical today. So can you tell us what brought you there?
Oh, absolutely. Well, what brought me there was my life. At the time that I started doing the work, I was a parent of three teenagers, say like 14, 16, and 11, something like that. This was about 2008, and it was a very specific time where would say if you asked anybody who's about 30 years old now, like when did they start getting on social media, it was about 2007, 2008, where Facebook became something that was starting to emerge in that community. And in my small, suburb that I was raising my kids in, kids were starting to get on Facebook, and parents were starting to realize the kids were on this thing called Facebook. And there was like murmuring, like, what is this thing, what are they doing? And some parents wanted to get on there and monitor their kids, and other people were curious. My husband and I were just curious. My husband's really into tech, so he loves
Mm.
anything that was like new. He was a really early, back when I was like, what would I possibly use the internet for? He was like trying to convince me that it was something that would mean something in my life. So, he certainly jumped in with both feet. Anyway, we joined Facebook, and literally within a matter of minutes, we were inundated with friendship requests from people who were friends of my kids, which we found very odd. And we had no idea like why they were wanting to friend us, but we would accept their friendship. We didn't understand that at the time. It was strictly a numbers game. These kids just wanted to be able to say, I've got 500 friends, I've got 1,000 friends. They didn't care who those friends were. So, we got all of these young people as friends. And what started to happen for me as an artist is that um, started to become like every weekend, or say every Monday, I would wake up to an onslaught of images that had been taken over the weekend by kids in their private space. And it was just this fascinating anthropological study of how a group of people behave when they don't think anyone's watching. And um and this is absolutely nothing different than teenagers have always done their whole lives. This is just the first time people had a camera in their hand at all times and could take pictures of every moment of their lives. So I started seeing these pictures that were beautiful. And, a lot of times it was in a dark space, and a lot of times it was a very dramatic, emotional moment. And it was like, girls hanging on each other, looking slightly drunk. And it was boys, holding, their beers up to the sky. And it was, people making out and dancing, whatever. And, so like the mom in me was like, oh my God, I probably shouldn't be like looking at these. And then the artist in me was like, these are beautiful images of like these bodies in motion, because they almost always seemed like they were in motion. And I need to do something with this. And so I became really interested in wanting to document some of these photos I was finding. My first my first attempt in this series was to paint them, and just paint them straight on. I was doing paintings and they were sort of veering into sort of a pop sensibility. So I started trying to do like some fairly large canvases based on these photos. And like I said, I would, pop the colors, a little bit more candy color. And I did that for a couple of years. And I was part of a critique group in my area, and I would take them there. And over the course of this time, I just became so frustrated, because the feedback, I knew there was an idea here, but it wasn't coming through in my paintings.
Mm.
They weren't interesting enough. And that might have been due to my abilities as a painter at the time, or just that, it just was too limited. The process, the materials I was using did not fit the message I was trying to create. So after a couple of years of doing this and being frustrated, the light bulb went on at one point, and I thought about embroidery, which is something that I had always been like a person who was very into crafts. I sewed, I had done embroidery, I had done quilt making. So these were things that were part of my lineage.
Mhm.
And so I just had this idea of, what if there were some people that were starting to do embroidery that was very bold. And, the phrase kept being, not your mother's embroidery. And so I guess I was inspired by these people I was seeing that were doing this kind of radical embroidery, and thought that I would try embroidering these images instead of painting them. And I wanted them to be very simple. I wanted you to know that they were from Facebook. So I actually appropriated the idea of the Facebook box, and then the commentary underneath it with, like the thumbs up for how many likes you got. And at the time, there was also a website called, oh God, what was the name of it? Quotes from Last Night or something like that. And
Oh.
and it was this warehouse of people could just load quotes that they had heard someone say. And it was a very young thing where, it was mostly teenagers adding to this. But it gave me the idea, because I wanted these to be narratives. I wanted to tell stories, but I didn't want to directly copy. So I would take these images, I would do an outline version of them inside the box. And then for the commentary, I would source this website, Quotes from Last Night, and just find unrelated quotes that I felt added to the narrative in some way. And so I would, so it, took them out of reality. And the fact that the drawings were line drawings, sort of, it also made it so, like, you weren't likely to recognize anybody in these.
Mhm.
There was a bit of separation between, the realism of them. Um, so I started creating these I mean, they're almost like comic strips in a way, like panels from a comic strip. They're also, the Facebook square that you get. It was just sort of like how I saw them, and I just loved the rough edges. So I wanted them to feel uh, a little rustic, I wanted there to be a sense of the hand, that things were not perfect here. And so I started creating these. And when I had a number of them, there was a gallery that I had been trying to get to pay attention to me for a number of years. And this gallery director, Aaron Packer, kept responding when I would send him my work. He'd say, "I'll think about it," and then I'd never see him again. He was very nice, think about it. I sent him these drawings and he was like, "Yeah, why don't you come on in?" So I
Yeah.
went to see these and he thought they were wonderful. And he was like, "Okay, I'll show some of these." So I developed a way to frame them. I initially wasn't sure I wanted to have them under glass, but they are fragile. I didn't want people picking at them or anything like that. So, I had them framed under glass. He took them and he started representing me, which was wonderful. I had a wonderful relationship with him for many years. So that's how the series started. There's some more I can get into, but I think I'll wait. And I think it might come up in some later stuff. And then that series, just because what you guys are seeing in your gallery space, actually, there's a sub series, which is the ones that look like old-fashioned photos. And that's exactly what it was meant to be. So that evolved, when I started getting tired of the drawings and wanted to do more and wanted to use color, I had this idea that, when you're that age, when you're in your teens, your friends are your family. You're trying to pull away from your parents, and your friends can be the most important thing in your life. So I started creating family portraits, that, meaning that all of these kids were tied together by their friendship. And so I wanted to be reminiscent of what you think of like as the quintessential old-fashioned family portrait, where it's got the oval mat and it's got the, filigree, frame there. It's very ornate, and people are hanging it on the staircase on the way up the stairs. So in those cases, I was looking for images of people at very heightened emotions, and I wanted to capture just that face. And then I would pair them with an acronym that was currently possible, like, OMG or TMI or, RO. I can't even remember them anymore. ROTFL, things like that. So that became a series of work I did, sort of secondary. And then the third thing that's in the gallery at school is a series I called 56. So once I sort of decided I was done with these teen drawings, I was turning 56, and I was finding it it felt like a very poignant time for me. I felt like I was really aware of getting older and life not necessarily being what I thought it was going to be at that age, and that, life can be wonderful. And I'm not saying anything horrible is going on this, but it's just like, when you're cocky and 20 and you think you're going to be rich and famous, at that point in your life, then you get there and it's like, oh, that didn't work out the way I thought it would. So I literally wanted to start embroidering these images of things that I thought my life was going to be like, and to treat them like they were paintings that got wet and were melting in the rain, or wax that dripping off a surface. So if you look at the images and you see that the top of it is kind of a line drawing, and then it sort of blends into like being more colored, that's because the color is melting out of the top. And then as it's melting down to the bottom of the page, those threads start dripping off the bottom level. So that was just like my interpretation of like your dreams dripping away.
Literally unraveling, right?
Literally unraveling, falling off the canvas. And they just would be simple statements like I had, I thought there'd be trips to France. I thought there'd be vacations with friends. Just there was a lot of, I'm trying to think of what some of the, I did two of, I thought there'd be more dogs. I think one of those is at your place. But yeah, now I'm forgetting. All right, anyway, so those are the three groups of work that are hanging in the gallery.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't really considered the fact that they would feel very differently in paint. You know, I'm primarily a painter, but there's a quickness in the paint that would be similar to kind of the quick way that we capture images in social media. So can you talk a little bit more about how it really slowed you down to embroider these works and what slowing them down does when we're looking at them?
You know, I didn't approach the body of work with that thought in mind. It's just, it was more something that in the aftermath, you're like, you had talked to me about the contrast between this fast moving life. And yes, I mean, once the work started developing, I very much saw the, this really fascinating conflict between this fast-paced lifestyle, these images that come and just fly past you and are updated constantly, and me sitting on a couch for hours and hours and hours embroidering these things. But it wasn't like an overt intention on my part. I think that's one of the things that I love so much about this series is it all sort of came together. It's like the more it wasn't always obvious to me in the beginning, but as I thought of the series and the aftermath, there were just so many interesting connections and reasons for it to be, that it was kind of, I kind of was able to pat myself on the back and go, yeah, you really nailed that, that conceptually, yeah. Good job,
Yeah, it's like you intuitively knew, even if you couldn't articulate, why the paintings weren't working. And I think you solved it by kind of going around it.
Well, the introduction, here's what I did know, is once I started embroidering them, I understood that the mother was present. So when I first started painting them, there was nobody there. I was an invisible observer just painting these kids. Once I started embroidering them, because embroidery has such a maternal connection, it was obvious that it was mom looking in on the kids. So then that really blew open the whole idea of privacy and public, which is really a very big part of what the series came to be about, was issues of like, I mean, this is what it came to be about for a lot of people who looked at the work at the time. Because this was, okay, kids, this was, if I can take you back to 2008, this was very controversial work. There were a lot of people who did not approve of this work and were scared for it to be shown. And the idea that it was exploiting, well, okay, this goes into another question that you asked later, but that it might be exploitive. But yeah, the whole issue of privacy, what's private, what's public. I think nowadays we could argue that there's nothing private, and I think we've kind of come to terms with that and embraced it. And what surprised me about you wanting to show this work was that at this point, I didn't feel like this work was controversial anymore and significant anymore. But at the time, it was highly controversial, and nobody else that I was aware of was doing anything like this. I really was on the cutting edge of using social media as my source, my inspiration for my work. So yeah, that so yeah, the mother's presence was very clear and very instrumental, and the whole idea of embroidery being such a thing that's bound with home, domesticity, and these images where kids being out in the world, developing their independence, exploring their lives, trying things, sometimes dangerous things. Yeah, there was a lot of interesting conflicts going on.
So let me ask you, were you surprised at any reactions to this work? And I'm also curious now, hearing you talk, like, have you censored yourself? Have you decided that there's any that was too far?
So yes and yes.
Okay.
um, a surprising response to this work. So, you all understand the social media is like, 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation. So, everyone that I was seeing pictures of was primarily my middle child, my daughter, who was very social and much more confident so socially. And when I asked her about using her friend's picture, she was like, "Yeah, go for it." So these pictures were her friends or their friends or their friends. So this was part of a community for the most part, and it did start to get out that there was this mom in town making these photos of local kids. I mean, making these embroideries of local kids, and parents were furious. They were extremely upset with me, and I was very taken aback by it because it's. I mean, it's just when you're an artist. I think this is probably true for many artists. You kind of have blinders on. And if you get an idea in your head and you think it's really cool, you're not thinking about the rest of it, and it's like the whole idea that like, first of all, who's even thinking about like who's going to see it, if you're going to get famous, it's like you're just doing your work. And
Right.
this was like this cool idea that I just had to see and had to develop. And I was not thinking about anything beyond that. So suddenly, my daughter's getting phone calls from her friends that their parents are very upset by this. Um, they were going to my website and looking at the work, or going to the gallery website, or going to the work. Finally, there was one girl that I did she had very provocative photos, and I did a beautiful drawing of her in a very provocative pose. And her parents were aware of it, and they apparently were trying to decide if they could sue me. And,
Oh my gosh.
and then a friend of my daughter's, her father called up, and his opening line to me was, "I just want to know how you sleep at night." And then it went on from there.
Oh my gosh. Really?
Yes,
Wow.
really. And then he was a lawyer, and he proceeded to give me, a mouthful about how wrong this is, and how I shouldn't be doing this, and how dare I, and what kind of person am I. And so I kind of hid for a number of months in my town. I
would
didn't go to the grocery. I'm not a controversial person by nature. There's a part of me that is. It's like I like to poke the bear a little bit, but when push comes to shove, and I found myself in the eye of the storm, it was like, oh, I don't like this. So I tried to defend the work as just being work, and that like once this image has been embroidered, it is no longer your daughter or your son. It is a line drawing of a person in these activities that I, am curating and altering and using for a piece of art. But that wasn't going very far with these people. And then on the positive side, this was back Huffington Post, which is what it was called at the time, was like a really big deal. And they called the gallery and wanted to do a feature on me. And so they did a feature on me, which was a little like, like you could tell that the person writing it was like, so these are pretty racy. What do you guys think? And they had like 450 comments on this feature, which was a huge amount of response. And a lot of them were saying, this is the worst parent I've ever seen.
Oh my gosh.
There would be people saying, oh my God, she's the coolest parent I've ever seen. But there were a lot of people.
Wow.
So your first question, was I surprised? Yes, I was surprised. Did it censor me a little? Yes, it did. Like as I was finishing up this series, there was definitely a sense of, I no longer want to use other people's images. I want the image. I want if I'm going to do stories, they're going to be my stories that I own, and images that I own. I don't want to get into that mess again. And I go back and forth on that because, you know, like I said, there is a part of me that's kind of like, I don't mind pushing the bear a little bit if I feel, but you know, this wasn't like some big political statement, like I was trying to fight for some human rights thing. If I wasn't intending to hurt anybody, I didn't want to hurt anybody, but it certainly seemed like maybe the best thing to do would be to not use materials like that going forward.
Well, I mean, the anonymity is one question because, like you said, you're distilling it where you're not using names, you're abstracting the forms. So I
Mhm.
can't imagine that would be an issue. I guess when I was asking about censoring, I'm wondering, since you deal with provocative, kind of sexualized young teens, if there was any subject matter that you thought at any point, oh, this is too far. Like, did you consider using a subject matter that you thought would be too difficult?
Nothing came up that uh I mean, I don't know. There's certain words that I might have hesitated. I'm trying to think, like if somebody had used the C word for a woman, you know, with a woman,
Right.
I don't know that I would have embroidered that because of feeling disrespectful towards women. Although I wasn't, you know, it's not like I was that woke. Uh, but like I said, this one girl I was saying who did post a lot of provocative things, there was a photo that I did of her. She's clearly smoking a very big joint in her mouth, and she's spread out on a bed, her legs wide open, and it's like a photo coming at her
Mm.
from her feet to her head, you know, so it's a little distorted. It was very provocative, and that's the photo that, like, you know, she was upset by, her parents were upset by. And the the owner of Saatchi Art bought it. So, you know, that's the good news, bad news.
I think that's good news. I think that's good news. So, Kathy, I have to ask, are these works feminist?
Again, wasn't what I was thinking about at the time. Um, it wasn't an agenda. I mean, clearly, I was motivated by my identity as a mother. And I was aware of embroidery being a historically domestic activity for women. So I did understand the message that this was a mother in a contemporary society. When I think of if it's feminist work, I tend to think of things that feel like they're, you know, intentionally rebellious or pushing back on the patriarchy. And I'm not sure that I see that in the work, but there is an element of them poking fun and satirizing, you know, norms of motherhood. You could go there
Mm-hmm.
and say that, you know, the embroidery sort of brings in this whole, like, you know, this is what mothers, you know, nowadays think. So if that reads as feminist, then I guess the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think for me, there's an interesting subversiveness to it. You know, you kind
Mhm.
of lure us in with these embroideries that are, you know, kind of whimsical, but then you're like, oh, there's something a little bit darker going on. And there's a lot of gender dynamics. And I think it makes the viewer somewhat uncomfortable to confront those. I think in a way that's different from actual social media posts. You know, you kind of scroll through those in this same kind of voyeuristic way, but when you're contemplating a work of art, you're looking longer. And I think it's forcing you to really confront that imagery.
Well, certainly the idea that I was using found text with found images meant that I was creating the narrative myself. And there's no doubt that I intentionally would try to find text that
Mhm.
heightened the story, or, you know, possibly pushed it to a further extreme, or gave it a slightly darker twist than it might have naturally. So yeah, I think yes, whether it was conscious or not, that subversiveness was there.
Yeah, I think for me, they are more so than color portraits that are just like beautiful little jewels, but they don't stray that far from what we think of as traditional portraiture. So how did you feel about moving into those? I know you said you wanted to work with color and kind of play with that idea of family, but was there anything else in the selection of the acronyms?
I think the joy for me in making the portraits was the process. There was a point where maybe the drawings became a little redundant for me, and doing the portraits, I sourcing the material I used for the background, the mat, and using all the colors of the rainbow for the faces, and trying my best to do like beautiful colored portraits of human faces was a really fun challenge I loved. And then, I got a kick out of buying these like filigree frames and then spray painting them with high gloss black paint. I thought that was, very edgy. And so I really, really loved doing them from a process standpoint. I agree with you that the end result is not as provocative. But yeah, I loved making them.
Well, I don't want to monopolize the conversation too much. I'm going to invite people who are watching to start putting some questions for you in the chat or the Q&A. Maybe Stephen can pop back on once we have a few of those. So while we're giving everybody a few minutes to do that, can you tell us what you're working on now?
Yeah, right. I was just sitting here thinking like, oh, I didn't mention anything about what I'm working on. So the through line is that, I did decide that I didn't want to use other people's images. And since then, the work has progressively been more, what are my stories? What do I own? What's going? And, and I think, as I've gotten older and become an older woman in America, I'm much more aware of my invisibility. And I think that's something that's present for me in the work I've continued to try to do, is that I don't feel invisible. I feel like I feel like worthy, and I feel interesting, and I feel like I have stories to tell. And I continue to try to make art that shows that, well, the work I've been doing for the past few years since COVID has been sort of a satirical look at how boring my little life is. So it's the idea that, yes, I'm a woman of a certain age, and my life is pretty much like hanging out at home and walking my dog and sitting on the couch and watching TV. But what? I think that's hysterical. I think that's great. And I'm going to do art that, documents this silly little life I'm living and loving. And screw you if you don't think that that's interesting.
Right.
So that's sort of like where my attitude is. And I just am trying to, trying to say, I'm here, I'm still here, and I'm not going to apologize for what my life is. I like it.
Well, no, it sounds great. I mean, I love what you're doing now too. It's very different technically, and I think it's obviously much more autobiographical, right?
It's totally autobiographical. And so I should just give this as a follow-up. When I was done doing embroidery work, and I did continue to do like commission work and stuff like that, I actually quit doing textile work for physical reasons. Sitting and embroidering for very long periods of time was really taking a number on my neck and my shoulders, giving me headaches, and starting to cause like physical problems for me, because I'm not somebody who just like does it like for an hour or two at night. This was like, this is what I do all day. I consider myself a professional artist. So it really, I couldn't work that way anymore. And I needed to move away from textile work. But we have some questions if you want me to get to those.
Yeah. So one of my students, David, is asking, what do you feel is your biggest inspiration, and what work are you excited to do? Biggest inspiration?
Oh, God.
Maybe he's asking about an artistic inspiration, or, I mean, certainly the social media was for that earlier series, but what about now?
Now, well, like who I point to as my inspiration, for instance, in my artist statement, are a couple of artists that I think are just weird and wonderful. One of them is Grayson Perry, which I don't know how well known he is to anybody there. He's a very well known in UK. He's a British artist, probably about my age, very highly trained technically. An artist, does magnificent ceramics, but also paints, does print work. But what I love about him is he is like hysterically funny and wicked sense of humor, and his work is very political and social commentary. You know, he pokes fun at like the establishment a lot. And personally, he's a straight man with a wife and a child, but he has publicly and proudly dressed as a woman for decades, like without any apology. And he didn't even use the word, you know, trans person, or you know, or he just this is something he did, and I just think he's absolutely wonderful. I mean, now he talks about it more because it's more something everyone's talking about. He's just this like amazing mind. There was a show of Nicole Eisenman, who is an incredible contemporary artist, at the Museum of Contemporary Art this summer, and I went to it, and I was like, oh dear, this is the artist I would have liked to have been. She's just everything and then some. I mean, a magnificent painter, a figurative painter. If you're not aware of her work, she's a beautiful painter and does these colossal group portraits, and the people might be painted in totally different methods or styles. Like, it shouldn't work. It shouldn't go together. Like things that don't, she'll like paint different styles in the same painting. And yet it's just gorgeous. So she's a huge inspiration to me. So yeah, there's, people like that. I like looking at folk art. I like craft art. I like anything that's got, I like seeing hand in art. I don't like things that are so perfect you can't see that a human was there. And I like imperfection.
Awesome.
And I like figures. I like people. And I like storytelling. I like narratives. Two things that aren't terribly cool, but I like.
They're very cool. They're very cool. All right, so we've got another really good question here. We have one of our administrators asking a question. First, he says, thanks for being here, Kathy. Your work is a fascination. I see in the past that you did a lot of political work. Have you been addressing that in the recent election cycle? So he went there. Also, how do you see your role as an artist as it relates to politics?
I did do a body of work in like 2018, and I will say that it was after the election in 2016. I was very unsettled and uncomfortable with life, and it took me about 2 years to get back to painting. I really didn't paint, and so when I finally did, I gave myself permission to make work that addressed politics, but I felt like everyone around me was making angry art. And I was like, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. So I challenged myself to come up with a concept that would address political issues, but be beautiful and humorous. And so what I did is I took a lot of elements from Russian folk art, because there was all this discussion of Trump's relationship to Russia. And they're very beautiful Russian folk art. So I used that as borders. And there's a Russian folk artist that I used as inspiration. I would take elements from his paintings and put them into mine, and I created narratives that addressed different parts of the politics. And they were really fun to do, and a lot of work. And then after 6 of them, I felt like I was done with that and ready to move on. I have been starting to add more social or political commentary into my work again. There's a painting behind me that's a woman sitting on a deck looking out into a forest. And I know you guys can't see like the full thing. There it is. But
You're a little bit
there's a man on one side. Yeah, you know what? It's not worth it. Anyway, in the forest is a man with a gun and a hunting hat, and on the other side is a big bear. And it was inspired by a meme that's been going around the internet about, as a woman, would you be more threatened if you were alone to be confronted with a bear or a man? And like resoundingly women are saying, give me the bear, I'll take the bear, you know? So that's, you know, that's obviously political
Would you take the bear?
there too. So it creates, pardon?
So would you take the bear? Would
Would
you
I
go with
take
the
the
bear?
bear? Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely,
Okay.
I want the big cuddly bear every time.
Okay. So, you know, I think you addressed that question, but it's also, you know, maybe like what the role is for an artist in politics. Do you feel like you have a voice, or do you feel like that's really not in your area?
I feel like everyone has a voice. Like I'm not one of these people who feels like celebrity shouldn't like speak up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're citizens, we're all citizens of the world, of the country, and I feel like we all have a voice. Whether my voice means anything or not, I have no control over that. I do feel like if there are things that I feel passionately about, then I should be making art that addresses them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I mean, because this is what I do, right? I mean, I don't do anything else. So if I want to use my voice, this is how I'm going to use my voice. You know, it's just the natural order of things for me.
Sure. Sure. All right, so we've got another question. Noah is asking, when the internet first started to grow in size and population via social media, did you feel any pull towards trying to post your work online, or were you more hesitant?
You know, that's a good question, because I do think probably when this was first happening, and I'm just telling you about like the problems I was having with some of the work, I probably was hesitant to post it. It was like I was trying to I do sort of remember feeling like I was trying to keep it in the art world. Like I wanted artists to see it and I wanted galleries to see it, but I didn't really want everyone to see it.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I didn't want to get in more trouble or something. I didn't want people to hate me. Um, but that certainly and everybody else in the world got over that. I mean, yes, now, you know, I have no hesitation to post. Take that back. If I were to do something very provocative, I probably still would have questions about whether I was posting it or not. But I hope I would go ahead. I would like to be briefer about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the nature of being a visual artist is it's visual communication, and you want to share it with an audience. So that would make sense.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's almost like you're holding up a mirror to society too in your work.
Mm-hmm. My point of view, whatever my point of view's mirror is, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
the couple of other comments we've got, we still have time for some questions if you guys out there have them. They're just saying that they love to see that you still seem excited about your craft and the fire for it hasn't died. You know, thanks for being you, like really positive. And I know, you know, when I brought students down to the gallery, they really loved the work, but we're kind of taken aback at it as well. It does kind of surprise you, kind of sneaks up on you with those little feathery edges and the linen. I am glad you decided not to frame them. And we talked about transporting them from Illinois and how this made it a lot easier, more economical, but it also, you know, makes them more object-like. So even though they kind of began in this kind of digital realm and social media, they are very much objects. They're things rather than just pictures of things.
Yes, and I know from experience, you know, people are fascinated by the tactile element of embroidery or any kind of textile work, and it always kind of felt like a shame to put them behind glass
Mm-hmm.
and not
Mm-hmm.
be able to get, I know I feel that way when I see, you know, textile work. I really want to be able to get close to it. um, and so I don't know that if I were to do this again, I would frame them.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would trust the public enough to, you know, to not feel like they had to be framed. The other thing, and you and I discussed this, I think at one point, was that it was very important to me that this work be taken as fine art. At the time that I was doing this, like I said, there was just sort of a movement starting towards, you know, embroidery and textile work being edgy and something that could be shown by galleries. It was not the norm for most galleries. And And so by framing it and putting under glass, I think I was making a clear statement that this is fine art. This is not craft. This belongs in a gallery. So I do think that that was very much foremost in my mind, and I don't think I'd feel that way anymore.
Yeah, we've been talking about the high and low art. That was actually on the quiz for my students, so that was perfect. Jamie's asking if you have any unfinished projects that you're still completing, or any concepts or ideas for future projects that doesn't necessarily relate to something political.
So future is, I am moving in a month to away from Chicago, and I'm moving to Hudson Valley. And we are buying a house on 3.5 acres, and the house, there is a barn / garage that the former owner built, like, because they have like a car collection or something. But anyway, it's this magnificent, huge space for me to have a gallery, I mean, to have a studio, and it's heated and beautiful lighting and everything. So as far as like what's coming up, I'm picturing like maybe life-size bear statues made out of paper mache. And I'm just like, I'm excited about starting a new phase of my life, and just sort of soaking in this new environment and seeing, what needs to come out of it. I mean, we use the word political. I don't know that I'm going to do something directly political. If I feel I have to, I will. I think my interest lies more in social commentary, and I mean, I think we can use the terms interchangeably sometimes, but like, I'm more like to analyze like the gender roles and and the trends. I'm a huge pop culture nerd. I mean, I was in advertising for 10 years and 15 years before I became an artist. And so, I've always had like this fascination with what's new, what's current, what's trendy. And obviously you get to a certain age, it becomes harder to keep your finger on the pulse. But those are the things that still fascinate me, and I think I'll probably still want to explore.
Fantastic. I love the idea of opening up to a bigger space, and maybe that'll lead to larger scale pieces too, just naturally.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. So we got another question. Do you see yourself doing any collaborations in the future?
I don't know. I'm hoping again that this move to a place where there are so many artists who have settled, I'm just excited to see like who I meet, who I bump into, what comes out of it. Yeah, maybe I wouldn't be opposed to a collaboration. I don't find a lot of people working in the space I'm working in. And I think that's one thing where I'm kind of, and sometimes I blame it on Chicago being a fairly conservative city. But I'm hoping that moving to this new environment, maybe I will find more people that I can interact with, because like I'm in a group show right now from this critique group that I'm a part of. This very highly respected critique group. The woman was, the head of painting for University of Illinois for many years and stuff. And there's a show over in Evanston, and I'm literally the only piece of art in there that's like figurative and narrative. Everything else is like basically abstract. And it's just an example where I kind of feel like I don't know who I'd collaborate with,
Yeah. Well, it sounds like really exciting, to think about collaborating with somebody in advertising, or, somebody who's a social scientist. I mean, it could be really exciting.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are saying thank you for this and wishing you luck in your new adventures. I'll give one more minute. If anybody has a last minute question, I know sometimes they're a little bit.
Just real quick, there is one in the Q&A section as well.
Oh, I didn't see that one, Stephen.
Yep, totally fine. That one, it's something you probably alluded or hinted on a little bit, but from Ariana, it says, what inspires you the most when it comes to creating your pieces? I definitely know that you probably talked a little bit about it, but if you want to go into a little bit of that there.
just my life. I just am looking, I think of myself as a very earnest person, a very honest person. And so I'm not, I kind of want to just represent like my honest life in, in my work. I'm not necessarily looking to create something that isn't there. I'm more fascinated by documenting what is there, but with my skew on it, my perspective.
Well, thank you so, so much for taking the time to give us a little bit of backstory and trials and tribulations that you went through with parents. I never would have imagined that. It is interesting because it does bring up the idea of privacy, that somebody might not be as upset as a photographic post as, something that's embroidered and is hung in a gallery and really calling attention to it. So it gives us more to think about. Well, my students will be writing about this too, so I'll be sure to share some of their comments when they turn their papers in.
Great.
All right.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy. And I would encourage everybody, thank you for coming today, encouraging you to go down to the gallery and see her work if you haven't already. It's really fantastic, and we're very lucky to have it in the Friedman Gallery right now. So, Stephen, I think you can close us out if you have any other things to add.
Last announcement would be, aside from from Kathy's work showing in the gallery, we do have another lecture coming up November 18th. So just for anyone that wants to know, Nikki Enright will be doing a lecture on his work in the gallery as well. Aside from that, thank you everyone for showing up in our first time using Microsoft Teams for one of these lectures.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.